But coming back to look at how the tax debate has shaped up today, there is a preoccupation with this, and justifiably so. Within that whole debate is this talk of an early election. I want to bring in Grahame Morris now. He joins me here in the studio. Thanks so much for your time. Let's start on the election. Let's get it out of the way. Do you think, A, is it a good idea, and B, will the government do it?
Well, it's gone from about a 5% chance to a 25% chance. The only reason you do it is to sort out the Senate. The government, whether it was the Abbott government or Turnbull government, hasn't been able to do anything economically and get it through the Senate. So you could change the laws, get rid of the accidental senators who, they've had their day in the sun and they haven't done much with it. But get rid of the accidental senators, sort out the Senate, and then come back and try some of the economic stuff. That'd be the only reason you'd go early. The orthodox is sort of second last Saturday in September or the second week in October. And reason being, particularly if you're a government and in front, in August we're going to have the Rio Olympics. In September we've got every footballer's groin injury and crook back, and who's in the grand final, who's not. And that's all over the front page, and it robs the opposition of momentum. So the orthodox would be second Saturday in October or the second last in September, or you go early and sort the Senate out. And I still think the PM, just listening to him and looking to his colleagues, still favour the latter option, but he wants to keep open the option of an early election to maybe sort the Senate out.
I should mention that Bruce Hawker will be joining us very shortly as well. But Grahame, looking at, yes, the orthodox, but also the language we've seen from the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull. Now it feels like the cat's out of the bag. So how do you pull it back? Because there's been a lot of talk about an early election. All these big boxes are being ticked. And isn't it, simple, conventional wisdom in politics that when you have the numbers and when you have the popularity, you use it?
Look, I still think he's going to win anyway. The electorate's a million miles away from making Bill Shorten Prime Minister of this country. Look, if you're talking about sort of show stories, Malcolm Turnbull has sort of gone from best in show to best in breed if you're a dog or a cow or a cat or something, but he's still a long way in front. Look, we're all speculating on elections, but there's only one bloke who knows, or who will know, and that's the PM, and he didn't know yet. But you go to bed on a Friday night, you have a think about it on the Saturday, you wake up on the Saturday morning, you ring your deputy, you have a talk to your wife, have a talk to your chief of staff, then you call it. So, the PM's still a long way away from making up his mind.
I want to bring in Bruce Hawker now. He joins us from Sydney. Bruce, we have been talking about the prospects of an early election. Would it suit the Labor Party to go to an early election?
Well, right now, Labor's in a pretty strong position. It's got a policy out there on tax, which the government doesn't have. And sure, Shorten is behind Turnbull in popularity, in the popularity stakes, but this is not a presidential campaign. This is a parliamentary campaign, and you have to look at where the votes are at the moment, and it's pretty much on 50-50. So I think Labor would not be particularly scared of an early election. I think they've been doing the hard work, and now they've actually caught Turnbull on the hop. So I think they wouldn't be scared of one. Whether Turnbull wants one now is another question indeed, and I suspect that he probably doesn't, despite all the talk to the contrary.
But the government has really, Bruce, started to sharpen its scare campaign, its attack on Labor's negative gearing policy in particular. Today we saw that sharpened attack on the capital gains tax as well. How risky is this for Labor? Because some of those attack lines are really starting to bite, aren't they?
Well, we'll wait and see. But this is a government which keeps telling us we're all living beyond our means. We have to find ways of saving money. Well, Labor's policies on capital gains tax and on negative gearing are going to save $30 billion over 10 years. $30 billion. So where are the government saving measures going to come from? We haven't seen them. And it's pretty odd, isn't it? Labor's out there saying where it's going to save money, and the government is still floundering. We still don't know what they're going to do on any of their tax policies. Turnbull capitulated to his backbench on GST within about 4 days. So I think he's got to really build a spine somewhere and stand up to them and say, this is what I believe in. Then maybe he'll start to rebuild his credibility with the electorate. But if they think in the electorate that he's just dancing to the tune of the backbench and the right wing that controls the Liberal Party, then I think he'll continue to struggle.
Well, I'll get to that in a moment, but just on Bruce's point about the GST, do you think it was the right thing politically and economically to drop the GST? Because I feel like the Turnbull government has been preparing the electorate for massive big bang tax reform for the last 6 months, and now it doesn't look like it's going to be that at all.
Look, I agree with you. There was big build-up. Once you took the GST out, then it became very difficult to have a big bang tax thing. However, and this is probably just a bit before Bruce's time, but the Labor Party is going to get into awful trouble because there's probably only one person, that's Gary Gray, who knows this in the Labor side, and they didn't listen to him, and they've kicked Bill Hayden out. They don't listen to him. But Labor has already lost one election in 1980 on this. And Bill Hayden was going to be Prime Minister of this country until they came up with this cockamamie idea at the end of a campaign of maybe having a sort of a wealth tax and hurting the family home and the price of the family home. This policy of Bill Shorten, it kills, and that's why it kills Sydney, and that's why I'm finding it difficult why the government is making heavy weather of this. It's not hard. Australia was doing well in resources. We need a middle ground while we get to manufacturing and clever country and all that. The middle ground is real estate. And you stuff around with real estate in this country and you will wreck Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane and the Gold Coast.
And that is some of the arguments. We're not just hearing from the government, Bruce, but some economists as well. Yes, there are some economists that believe that you do need to tackle negative gearing. But again, my question, I'm repeating it, I know, but how worried are you about that? And one thing that I believe that Labor does have on its side here in terms of prosecuting its case is that it's not retrospective. It doesn't start till 2017, but that's not something we've seen Labor to date prosecute very well.
Well, Labor does have to come out and kill off the scare campaigns that the Liberals are going to run with and run with hard. But let's remember,
are they prepared to do that, do you think?
Oh, well, I think they're going to have to, and I think they will. And one of the things that they have to make absolutely clear is that negative gearing will continue for new properties. In other words, if you're in the business of building things, then you'll be able to go about negative gearing that property, and it will be prospective. Anybody who's now got a property that's negative geared, they'll be okay. So it's only what's going to happen in the future. People who are in a position where they've got negative gearing are going to be fine. And and there are all sorts of factors which go into determining the price of houses, not just this one thing. The government will run hard on it and try to say that it's going to bring down the price of housing. Mind you, there's a heck of a lot of people who live on the outskirts of Sydney who'd love to live a bit closer into Sydney, who wouldn't be too worried if the price of housing came down a bit. In fact, we've been told around the place that there's a housing bubble in Sydney and it's out of control and people can't afford. Well, maybe we just have to have a really good hard look at why the price of housing continues to become out of reach of average families and young people, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne and to some extent in Brisbane as well.
And Grahame, there is a group of Liberal backbenchers that are really concerned about negative gearing. For product differentiation alone, they think the Turnbull government shouldn't be touching negative gearing whatsoever. We also saw John Howard's intervention on this at the weekend. What's your view about at least the politics of this and, making those lines of attack clear?
Well, I think having killed off a huge tax package, They're better off making the case that now is not the time, maybe 10 years' time for negative gearing and capital gains tax. But at the moment, if you want to stuff Sydney and stuff Melbourne and Brisbane and the Gold Coast, muck around with the price of housing, and you know, Bruce says it's only for new homes. No, it's not. If you bugger the psychology of housing in Sydney, the price of everyone's home go down. And coincidentally, half the marginal seats are in Sydney. Good luck, Bruce.
Grahame, I will let you respond to that.
Yeah, just a scare pack campaign, you know, and it's being executed on behalf of the Liberal Party. You know, there is a real opportunity now to make for more equity in the way in which tax is distributed in this country. Labor's got two policies which are out there which are going to bring into the public coffers $30 billion over 10 years, and the Liberal government's got nothing. And as Bill Shorten pointed out the other day, that's after 900 days in office, they're still struggling to come up with a policy. Well, I think the Australian electorate expects a little bit more than that, and I think it's very interesting that Labor, who were being accused only weeks ago of having no policies, now have the jump on the government, and Turnbull, who looked like the great white hope after the disaster of Tony Abbott, is now floundering. It's a very interesting time that we're in politics, and I don't think anyone should be feeling too smug or too confident about the outcome of the next election. I think it could go either way.
It is a very interesting time in politics. A great white hope, Malcolm Turnbull. We will speak more about him on PM Agenda. But Bruce and Grahame, if I can ask you to stay with us, but want to bring in Grahame Morris and Bruce Hawker. Bruce Hawker, can I ask you first about Cardinal George Pell, the testimony we've heard today? We also heard there from Tim Lane detailing the effect it's had on his life. I guess I want to ask you the question I put to Tim there as well. How much blame can we actually put at the feet of Cardinal George Pell here?
Well, that's what the Royal Commission's meant to be determining, and I wouldn't want to preempt that. But I think there's little doubt that a significant proportion of the church hierarchy was well aware that some terrible things were happening to children, and there seems to be a consistent pattern these days of them admitting that they didn't properly investigate it, and in some cases there was active involvement in covering up and believing other clergy over children, transferring clergy into other areas rather than having them brought before the police. And therefore spreading the infection, if you like. You know, there's nothing particularly new about this, and child sexual abuse has been something which has been in the forefront of people's thinking and in public opinion for a long, long time. I remember back in the 1980s when I was working in the department, or for the Minister for Youth and Community Services in New South Wales, we had a very big campaign which basically said, you know, it's never right to touch or do anything inappropriate with children. That was back in the early 1980s. Those policies were being actively advertised on television. Everybody knows, you know, from the time that they become sensible and thinking adults, and that those are very wrong things that were happening to those children. So the church can't hide behind it and say that they were living in different times. You know, everyone who would have been complicit in that would have known exactly what they were doing. They would have known that they were committing crimes, and that those people that refused to exercise their role within the church of exposing that systematic abuse of children were culpable, almost as culpable as those who had actually committed the offences.
Grahame Morris, what's your view?
Look, I'm a great believer in the power of faith and in the importance of organised churches, but they've been tainted. This has been terrible. It is clear that 30, 40 years ago there was a different culture, and people were trying to look after the church and forgot about the kids involved. And you know, it's just unacceptable with hindsight, and probably unacceptable then. But this is going to sound awful, but I still think, what is the real problem here? What has caused this? It just seems to me when you have a heap of individuals placed in celibacy, you can have something go wrong. It just seems to me it is the most stupid, unnatural rule within the church, and we've got these grubs sort of breaking out because of the system. It should be abolished.
Grahame Morris, Bruce Hawker, quick break here on PM Agenda. We'll be back with Welcome back to the program. Grahame Morris, Bruce Hawker joining me here this afternoon. I want to pick up on something that we heard at the weekend as well. And Grahame Morris, first to you on this. And John Howard touched on this as well. And this is the culture wars are alive and well, perhaps not his words, but he was pointing to the example of perhaps Donald Trump in the United States and him being the emergence of the anti-politician, and that's what his popularity is really down to. And his point was that people are too scared to say things that really should be said at the moment. Is that something that's permeated into Australian politics as well?
We're certainly getting there, Laura. Yeah. You know, there are a number of topics at the moment where it looks as if only the minority zealots are allowed to talk. You know, and they sort of come down like a ton of bricks on anyone who's just orthodox. And there's no doubt Trump is benefiting from that sort of global phenomenon where, you know, everyone is pussyfooting around for fear of upsetting somebody's senses. Well, too bad. You know, nobody wants Donald Trump as president, but by Jesus, he's going to go close on that sentiment. And we have seen it in Australia, where we went just too far on political correctness, and up comes Pauline Hanson, God help us, and starts, you know, spruiking motherhood. And 70% of what she said was stupid. 30% the electorate said, well, what's wrong with that? And you know, we will have a breakout here soon unless people with orthodox views can get up and express them.
Bruce Hawker, there's a point to be made here, isn't there, when it comes to this debate about the Safe Schools program as well. Look, I think it's a good program when you hear from the people that have been bullied growing up in high school, being a gay student. Some of these stories are absolutely heartbreaking, but it's not to be said that we can't have a conversation about it. And we do see some of those opponents howled down, especially in Parliament. Would you agree?
Well, you talk about Corey Bernardi, I presume. Corey Bernardi, who...
Yeah, but it's not just him, and he can often be painted as a maverick and outlier, but there's some, you know, more moderate thinking rather than conservative thinking members of the Parliament who are concerned about some of these things being taught in schools, that their view is that perhaps it needs to be the parents who make a decision about that, not the schools.
Let them have the debate. No, you know, it's absolutely absurd to suggest that there's any shortage of debate or opportunity for debate in this country. It's getting easier and easier. Everyone can have a Twitter account. Everyone can have their Facebook account. People can get on TV like Grahame and me and spruik. You know, I mean, there's no shortage, and you know, and Grahame can say the most outrageous things, and he'll get a bit of publicity as a result of that. So it's just nonsense. And the former Prime Minister John Howard was on about this back in 1996 when he was talking about lifting the of self-censorship on Australia, and he's just returning to it now. You know, the Trump phenomenon in America is very, very unique, I think, and has very little relationship to anything that's happening in Australia. But the idea that with people like Alan Jones and Paul Murray on this on this channel and 24-hour news like we have on Sky, that people's views aren't somehow being aired, that's nonsense. You know, and it should be dismissed for what it is. It's just an attempt really to stop people from coming out and talking about these issues. You know, it's the old deeply conservative characters who don't want these things being discussed. They feel threatened when people come up with new ideas. And let's face it, you know, we live in a world of rapidly changing ideas. Not all for the better, but everybody gets an opportunity to talk now in a way that they never did before.
Well, Bruce Hawker, thanks for your time this afternoon. Grahame Morris, thank you as well. And of course, we won't mention the Irish, which I think Bruce unkindly referred to there. Gentlemen, thanks so much for your time. We'll see you soon.